Thanks for joining us today, and thanks to Bill and Anthony and all the Googlers that supported this event and bring us all together. My name is Rahul. I'm the founder and CEO of Clora, and then I also host a podcast called Biotech 2050, which Bill mentioned earlier. But today we're here to talk about Ankit, and Ankit and I have known each other for 20 plus years now. And full disclosure, he's obviously a customer of Clora. But what we wanted to talk about today was to start off and just talk about his entrepreneurial journey and how he got to where he is today, and then we'll go from there. So yeah. Ankit, over to you, please.
Yeah, thanks, Rahul. Yeah, 20 years makes you feel a little old, doesn't it? Just to start from the end and then work backwards, I'm founder and CEO of Spero Therapeutics. We're a public company focused on developing solutions for patients with infectious disease. We have 3 programs that are in phase 2 clinical trials or later. And we started that company from a PowerPoint slide back in 2014 and built it up to where it is today. And working backwards, I didn't really have any designs to either start biotech companies or be a CEO. It just kind of happened that way. Actually, from early on, born and raised in the Chicago area, families from India. My father had 2 scholarship offers. One was at Illinois and one was at Berkeley. And since he had a third cousin in Ohio and it was closer on the map, he chose Illinois. So we're White Sox and Bears fans and not Golden State Warriors fans. And early on, I knew I wanted to help patients in medicine. I have an uncle that's a physician, had a chance to go to the hospital with him. And the rest of my career has been figuring out how to best do that. In 4th grade, I thought I wanted to be a cardiologist, and actually going up into high school, that's what I thought I'd do. And much to my parents' delight, I went to Northwestern mainly because they gave me admission to med school as a high school kid, and gave me the freedom to kind of do what I wanted to do. And then much to my parents' dismay, I decided to defer going to medical school and ended up thinking I wanted to be in healthcare policy, which I did for a couple of years. I worked on Capitol Hill for Ted Kennedy's staff, working primarily on Medicare, Medicaid policy, and then figured out that my patience level wasn't matching up with what policy does. So long way of saying I made my parents happy again and went back to medical training and studied at Johns Hopkins, put a MBA in the middle at the Wharton School, and then got the bug of starting companies. Started one with IP out of Hopkins, and then ultimately was invited by some of the folks here in town, a fund called Atlas Venture, to join them. And I thought that would be 3 months to pay off some wedding bills and student loans, and that ended up being 15 years. So after that, 3 5-year chapters. First 5 years as part of the investment team at Atlas. Second is kind of a hybrid investment and operator, where I started a number of companies. And then the last 5 years, as we got closer to the IPO at Spero, CEO. So over that time, founded 9 companies. 3 have gone public, 5 have sold, and Spero continues today.
Wonderful. So certainly Ankit has seen a lot over his career. Would love if you could talk to us about just the arc of Spero and what it was, obviously during the early days and where you are now, and perhaps some key milestones and inflection points along the way.
Yeah, and Spero was something that we started when I thought I was going to do something else. And so I was running 2 companies at the time. One is Synlogic, which is public now, and the other one was Rethinking Therapeutics that sold to Alkermes back in 2020. And Spero was an idea that I came up with the gentleman who's our chairman now, Milind Deshpande, who's been in infectious disease for a while. And as a medical student, for me, the 2 things that I liked best were, one, surgery, and the second was ID. Why? Because I have a short attention span, and those are the 2 places where you can have an immediate impact on a patient. If you cut out their tumor, ultimately their lifespan is a lot longer. If you find the right antibiotic for someone who's in the ICU, they could be up having breakfast with their kids the next day. And so that was always fascinating to me. And as a venture person, it was always amazing how little we did in ID compared to oncology or neurology or inflammation. And the reason was that the pathway required to get drugs approved in ID was a lot longer than, for example, oncology. Back in 2012, that changed, and the US government created legislation called the GAIN Act that basically turned ID into what we think about for orphan drugs. So that's when we started a company. Really, it was $400,000 seed investment that said, well, ID's probably changed fundamentally. Why don't you go around and see if you can find something, and if we like it, we'll give you more money. And that's what we did. So we started Spero in 2014. And I'll say it's kind of the arc of biotech. We've had 4 different lead programs at Spero. 3 of them failed. We've had 6 drug failures over the period of time, and we've managed to, through our pipeline efforts, keep going. So the company started on a concept out of Mass General Hospital that basically said, instead of killing bacteria, can we shut them off? Because that way you don't teach them to become resistant. So that's what got our Series A done. That's what got us a partnership with Roche. And then it turned out that the drugs that worked against that biology couldn't be formulated IV, and the things that you could formulate IV didn't work. So we pivoted over to something else, and then to something else, which was our oral carbapenem, which is now our lead program. So over that time, raised a Series A, raised a Series B, and actually in this building, we raised a Series C because Google Ventures led our Series C in our crossover round and then took it public. And so, you know, at this point, our CSO likes to say we've been through about 8 half-lives as a biotech, being around for, you know, almost a decade, and we've gone through seed stage, Series A, preclinical, clinical, and now, you know, looking at late-stage trials and doing transformative partnerships. We're about 60 folks today, not including the folks that we work with on a partnering basis as well.
Great. And so there's certainly been lots of ups and downs along the way that's required you to think, and your team to think in a very nimble way in terms of how to scale teams and what drives value creation. Talk to us about how your own mental model around value creation and scaling teams has changed from perhaps when you started Spero to where you are now.
Yeah, and this has been true across the 9 companies I've been involved with. You know, I fundamentally believe that you hire for leadership, and then you think about complementing your capabilities as you learn what your platform or your programs are going to do. And so across all of those companies, it's always been important to hire a core team that's pretty senior, shares your vision, and can do a lot of different things. You know, at Spero, we have a group of people who've been with us almost the full 10 years that we've been around. I think to complement that, though, we've been really grateful of working with you and as well as others to complement what those folks know to actually get the work done. Because what turns out is that these aren't linear exercises. As I mentioned, the programs tell you sometimes every day whether you should do more or less of a particular program, and you have to be nimble. And I think being able to work in a distributed way helps you be nimble in that way, which has been critical to our success. You know, I give a particular example. You know, we recently did a fairly large collaboration with GSK. It was around a program, tebipenem, that heretofore wasn't our, you know, lead focus. It was something that, just given the environment of last year, we weren't able to push forward. We were fortunate enough to be able to convince GSK about the value of the program, and we did a fairly large collaboration that's extended our runway beyond 2025. What it did require us to do is to look our colleagues at GSK in the eye and say, well, here's a program that we haven't really resourced, but we're going to go from 0 to enrolling patients this year, you know, after this collaboration. And as folks know, it's not easy to really hire the kind of scale that you're looking for, and it's not easy to say, okay, well, in perpetuity, there's going to be all of these things for you to do. And so in that specific instance, we were, you know, fortunate to work with Clora to kind of balance out that we had 2 programs already in phase 2, and we needed the resource to be able to run quickly to a phase 3. And so all of the things you need for a clinical trial, data management, clinical operations, support on the regulatory side, it's very difficult to just have them within the company just sitting there waiting for something to do. Biotech people like to be busy. They like to be oversubscribed, and it's you know, you have to marry that with how variable your pipeline can be.
Yeah, and you know, let's say you were starting a new biotech, knowing you know, that's fairly likely in the next couple of years. What's one takeaway that you'd like the audience to have as they think about, particularly given the environment that we're all in right now, around value creation and how to think about resourcing and defining the right partners?
Yeah, and balancing the resource you need and where you need to go as a company is the fundamental strategic way that you can build value. You know, in biotech, ultimately, it's really about data, and the data will tell you where to go. The hard part is that once the data tell where you go, you need to go to the next phase yesterday. And you know, when you think about building the people around you, it doesn't often take that long. So my view kind of has been confirmed over time is have people around you that have seen a few movies, believe in your mission, and can do multiple things. But as you think about building the resource and scaling, having a model where you kind of balance who's in your company versus who you're collaborating with the outside is super important. The idea of, you build the culture for biotech. People believe in the mission, they live and breathe, and they really, come in. And I think you have to be really thoughtful when you bring someone in, because you're really making a commitment to them. And so they've made a commitment to us, we've made a commitment to them, and folks have been with us for a long time. But I think predicated on that is that you have to be thoughtful about how big you scale before you get to a certain point. And I think that the solution to that will be, working with folks who work with you part of their time along the way.
And based on the shift in direction, but also your own approach to scaling teams, what have the conversations been like with, let's say, investors or other stakeholders, and the most common pushback you get to how you're thinking about approaching scaling versus how the rest of biotech tends to?
Well, I'd say that the first thing, the best way to get an investor's interest right now in 2023 is to tell them you don't need to raise money, which we don't. And so that's been a good opening to the conversation. I think the second point is that it's kind of yes and. So this becomes, I think, more acute as you go to the public markets. Public investors want you to be lean, but they also want things on or ahead of schedule. And I think balancing the two is incredibly important. And I would say that, and it's just the nature of the ecosystem. The majority of investors they're really good at what they do, but it means that by getting really good at what they do, they haven't been in the shoes of folks who've run a company. And I think it's kind of modulating the expectations and being reasonable and realistic about where you need to land. And I think that the forcing function is that you have to, again, be nimble about where you invest and where you don't. And in biotech, time is money, right? You have to develop data to be able to generate the capital necessary to get to your next act. So paying for time is always good. I think it's being really thoughtful about where you pay for that time and where you invest versus where you don't.
So as you all can tell, Ankit is a man of many talents. And so recently he also wrote a book called Quiet Leader, Loud Results. So we're going to have a book signing during the networking session here, but would love if you could talk to us about why you decided to write the book. And me being an introvert myself, I thought it was really well written, and there's not a lot out there around how to be a leader when you are an introvert. So would love your thoughts on this.
Yeah, and I'm kind of not practicing what I preach. I'm doing an in-person book signing as an introvert, which is going to be interesting. But so just kind of to back up, I've always been interested in writing. For about 10 years, I've been doing different biotech blogs, one for the Atlas folks, one for Luke Timmerman, and over time, just kind of the way things happen, someone had reached out to me from the literary world, said, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I said, gee, I don't know. And he said, okay, why don't you think of a few things? And this was something that's been close to my heart. And actually, as it happens, the pandemic lockdown was a really interesting experiment. I think that some of my colleagues at Spero that are extroverts were going nuts, not having the in-person office interaction, 5 days a week, 6 days a week. For me, I felt like a man that was liberated. I've never been more productive when I was, sitting by myself in my office. And, it was an interesting experiment for me. So I decided to reach out to some folks, yourself included, say, hey, are you guys experiencing this? And I ended up talking to folks in biotech. I talked to an introverted senator, and everyone said, well, yeah, being by ourselves has really unlocked quite a bit of creativity. And it led us all, about 30 of us, to explore what does it mean to be an introvert in a world where typically, especially here in America, the nature of someone who leads and gets things done is someone who's very comfortable doing an in-person book signing like this. And so we then went one level deeper and said, that's not necessarily true. If you look at the data, actually, and they've done these controlled experiments where they ask boards who's effective, who's not, what's the personality type. It turns out that introverts are perceived by their boards to serve the interests of their company better than extroverts are. Adam Grant did an example of this on a more tactical level, which is he kind of divided managers of a particular pizza chain into two groups. One is extroverted managers, introverted managers, and it turns out introverted managers did better on hard metrics, especially if they had a motivated group. So the book tries to explore in two parts. The first is, Well, the data suggests that many introverts kind of self-select out of leadership. I'll give an example. And we're at Google, so I can give a tech example. I was at a leadership class at Wharton, and they had an example of how to get your team excited about something. And they played a video and said, well, this is exactly how you do it. Perfect example. And they played an example of Steve Ballmer getting sweaty and getting his developers excited. And by the end of the talk, the guy almost had his shirt off. And I looked at my friend and I said, there's just no amount of substances in the world that's going to get me to do that. I guess I'm not a leader. And so that's kind of perpetuated even to places that purport to teach leadership. And in my own experience, it turns out that you don't necessarily need to do that. You just need to be you. And I wanted to make sure that that was true across different walks of life. In ours and also in tech, the data really rules. So you could say, well, quiet people can because the data kind of speak loudly for you. But it turns out it's true across other places too that you wouldn't expect, like politics as an example. And so then the second half of the book is really about just abstracting from those 30 folks that I've worked with and myself. What has worked? How do you systematize that? How do you get past the idea that you're an imposter if you're an introvert, but you're trying to lead and make people believe in something bigger than themselves? So there's a lot of case examples and perhaps what we've been able to abstract systematically, about what works.
Just my 2 cents, and this is coming obviously from a semi-biased space, but I think it's really well written in terms of consolidating a bunch of different approaches, because it's certainly not a one-size-fits-all approach in terms of how various different leaders have been able to effectively drive organizations to have outstanding results, but within the constraints of who they are, as in being an introvert. So really, really nicely done. I haven't found too many books or even articles out there around that go the level of depth that you've gone. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I wish, sitting alone in the lockdown really unlocked a lot of writing time, so it was great.
We were thinking of doing a book launch party for when he launched the book, and then his wife messages me and she says, this is a book about introverts. Like, it needs to be like 3 people, and we should go out to dinner.
Well, and truth be told, it was 3 people for my book launch party, which was great.
Well, that's it, Ankit. Thanks for joining us today.